Hi, Ron McCoy here. Welcome back to RM Real Moments. Of course, I work at a place called Ross, and I'm almost 65 years old. I will be 65 in 3 months and 2 days. And I've watched a lot of videos on YouTube about people in their 50s, mostly 50s, who have been laid off from their jobs, and they've been off of work for a long, long time. Because they claim no one will hire older workers. Now, I have two sisters, they're twins, and they were each laid off from the IRS recently. Sandy was laid off February 24, and Susan's last day technically was June 30. And they're both being paid by our U.S. government through September 30. They haven't worried too much about it all summer long, and they've reveled in the opportunity to not work. But as September 30 creeps closer, they're beginning to get concerned. And I had a message from my sister today saying that she didn't want to start tapping into her savings because once the IRS, the United States government, stops paying her, all of the money she needs to use for daily expenses and so forth has to come from her savings. So she's applied now for Hobby Lobby and Home Depot, hoping to get a job at one of those two places. And in a previous segment, I mentioned that my other sister has applied for Westlake Hardware and some tractor store. She wants to be able to get the discount. She lives out in the country, not necessarily on a farm per se, but she has horses and so forth. So she's looking forward to getting that 20% discount. I would be willing to bet that both of them get the jobs that they are seeking, which brings me to a question. If there are older people, 50s and 60s, who are wanting to work, I'm sure most places would be willing to hire them because when you've lived to your 50s and to your 60s, you have acquired skills and work habits. Not everybody, but in general, it seems like those in their 50s and 60s seem to have a work ethic that even people who grew up in the 60s and in the 70s, like I did, even if you didn't grow up in that time, and even if you did, you don't necessarily have the work ethic that you need. And like I've mentioned before, my work ethic came. There's that thumbs up. It must like me. That work ethic came as a result of working at World's Fun for 9 seasons. I also worked at McDonald's, and of course I taught school for 40 years, and that definitely builds work ethic into you. And over at Ross, we do have people in their 50s who work there. No one in their 60s. I'm in that category all by myself. Lucky me. But those in their 50s, unequivocally, they show up on time, they come in, they are serious about their work, they don't stand around on their cell phones, they don't mess around. Now, like I've said, I don't want to disparage people in their 20s. I was in my 20s once, I was in my teens once. I wasn't necessarily the most responsible person when I was that young as well. I think with age comes more responsibility and more responsible behavior. It's just what you do. I don't know what it is. It's part of maturing, I suppose. Anyway, since I've been out of teaching, I have worked really hard not to be so goal-oriented and just to let things go. I haven't been successful at that. I have a series of videos, and I have a YouTube channel, of course, and I've been working now on another series. It's Retail Rob number 14. I've had this series since February. It's one of several series. Yeah, thumbs up. Several series that I have incorporated into my YouTube channel. At Ross today, I was querying people about what they wanted to be when they grew up. Like when you were a kid, what did you aspire to be? I asked several people this question. Interestingly, none of them, as adults, ended up doing what they aspired to do. I shared too what I wanted to do when I was a kid. I wanted to be a fire chief because the fire chief got to drive a car, a big red car, or so I thought, because I had a fire chief car that had batteries, and when you put the batteries in, it would go around on the floor, and when it hit something, it would turn and go a different direction and so forth. I just loved cars, and so I thought, well, if I'm the fire chief, I get to drive this big red car. That didn't last long. I loved the idea of being an architect. I loved drawing blueprints. I used to do it when I was in junior high. We had study hall, and I didn't study. I sat and I drew like a floor plan of a school, of that school. I was just interested in floor plans, and I loved, like I shared today at work, I loved touring buildings under construction. When Liberty High School, which is just right over here, was under construction, the original one, as kids, we would ride our bicycles up there or walk, and we would tour the inside. It was all open. You could go in. One time there were kids up in the rafters, and they were throwing light bulbs down at us. You know, it cost the district money. And but I was always fascinated by the layout, the blueprints, and so forth. But I moved on from that. I also wanted to own my own TV station in this area. Starting in 1969, at the end of October, we had a station, Channel 50, KCIT, and I was in heaven with Channel 50 because it aired almost all reruns of TV shows from the early to mid 60s, shows that I just missed out on since I was born in 1960. The Munsters, Astro Boy, one of my favorites. We also watched the Patty Duke Show. Lost in Space was on Channel 50 later on. Loved that channel, and I was fascinated by the fact that it went bankrupt about a year and a half after it first went on the air. I wanted to own my own TV station. I remember they had Underdog reruns on that station, and I thought how neat it would be to have a TV station where I could program all of the shows. And of course, shows back then were run on 16 millimeter film on local stations on primetime. In primetime, they were 35 millimeter film. Always fascinated by film, as I have elaborated on in a previous segment. But I didn't do any of those. But then I also said, no, I didn't end up owning my own TV station, but I do run my own YouTube channel, which elicited some guffaws. Anyway, I sure wasn't up to full speed at Ross today. Well, internally, I still projected a positive attitude. I still worked hard. I still worked over 7 hours. At the end, I ran 2 racks of apparel, even though no one told me to do it. It's just that work ethic that was built into me throughout my years of working as a teenager. When we would go out and stay with my grandparents east of Liberty on Richfield Road, we had responsibilities that we had to take care of. One time my grandfather took my sisters and me to a field across the street, a field owned by my grandparents' neighbors, and we spent the morning hoeing out weeds, usually Johnny Reachovers, out of the soybeans. And when we were finished, we came home, and my grandmother, well, my grandparents' house, my grandmother had snickerdoodles baked and ready for us. At the time, we didn't really like the idea that we were going to our grandparents' house and we had to work, but I have nothing but fond memories of that. And they had a German Shepherd Collie dog whom my grandfather carried, thumbs up, to the top of that loft, or to the top of the barn in the loft, because we wanted Duke, the name of the dog, up there. We built mazes and rooms using bales of hay, and we wanted Duke up there with us. So my grandfather, who was 6'5" and extremely strong, carried Duke up the ladder, even though Duke did not want to go. We had tried to coax him, but he wouldn't go. I remember he was salivating because he did not want to be carried up to that loft, but my grandfather carried him anyway. And we were in the house. We saw Duke with his head, poking through the window, the door, the opening into the loft. And there he was up in the loft 1 minute. We looked again, and Duke was down on the ground. He had jumped. And later in life, in 1985, that finally caught up with him. Because then he ended up getting so he could barely walk. He couldn't get up, is what it was. And my grandfather and grandmother decided that he was not enjoying a quality of life. So my grandfather shot him, and my grandmother had dug a 6-foot trench, and they buried Duke right there. And my grandfather well, his heart had stopped when he was in the hospital to have a pacemaker put in. So my grandfather was not physically able at that time to dig the trench, so my grandmother dug the trench. But such is farm life. And I think a lot of my work ethic came from them. Both of them were definitely type A people, very much serious about. My dad, who was an only child, grew up with them and was definitely not a type A person, except about his affinity for baseball. And he really was not a person who aspired to a career which he loved. His job working for the United States Post Office was very much a job that he put in. He had to have money because he had a family, but beyond that, he didn't do anything above and beyond the call of work. But my grandparents on both sides were very much that way. And I will continue to elaborate on work ethic and so much more as RM Real Moments continue. I have to sign off now, but great things are definitely coming.